All right, so I'm just starting here because these directions are a little bit hard to follow. So I'm going to start by introducing my background a little bit. I'm an electrical engineer, working more on the software side of things. So your chloramine presentation was pretty abstract to me, to say the least. So I really am a very non-specialist reader, or I guess listener, which is probably beneficial for you in the end. So I just took a couple of notes while I was watching. I honestly think one thing that's really beneficial for you is that your listener gave you some amazing feedback at the end. Go back, watch that. I think that's a really good place to start when you're revising your presentation and practicing for the final one you give here in a couple weeks. Excuse me. Um, so right off the bat here, as your listener said, you talk a little bit more about the ASHRAE standards. Um, Again, you really didn't do that too much. Listen to exactly what he said. I didn't write anything down for that because what he said was spot on. So go back and listen to that, and that's going to be really beneficial for you. Um, so here, this, sorry, I'm getting all these notifications. This was where the first issue for me arose, and it was what are trichloramines. Um, so give a little background for this sort of stuff, because your non-specialist reader is not necessarily going to know what this is, especially if you're going to be referring to it throughout your presentation. The other thing that I took away from this slide was that I don't think you necessarily need to explain what each of these pool zones are. I think that's pretty obvious, and that took a little bit of time actually. You were 3 minutes over, which I kind of joked about in your table that I made. It would have deducted 1,000 points, and you would have been at minus 120. So that's really something you need to focus on. But a place you can do that is just by cutting down on these things that aren't super necessary. You don't need to talk about what the pool zones are. Um, so I talked about the chloramine release slide being a little distracting, and I think that was referring to the graphics, how you started with just the area, then the swimmer sort of pops up, which was the main distracting part for me. Um, the thermometer, not so much. Really, I think this background is just distracting. It takes away from what you were trying to say. Honestly, I would have to go back and listen to this slide again to know exactly what you were talking about, because the first time I saw it, I was so focused on the swimmer. So find a solution for that. I probably would just remove the swimmer altogether. Um, I think this is obvious. On Oops, I went too far. This slide in general was just very confusing. You gave a lot of technical information, and for me, that was too much. Also, don't mention you made it on paint. I know you won't do that during the final, but just that sort of stuff. Really, just be confident. A couple times you mentioned that this was a rough draft, whatever. Don't do that. Be confident. Be confident in your preparation, your research that you did, and you're going to do fine on this sort of stuff. As long as you cut down a lot of the technical aspects of it. Um, the last thing I think I have here, and you're going to find a lot more than what I'm saying right now in my table. I mean, I could be flipping back and forth, but that's not super beneficial for you. You can go look at that. I took really good notes during it. I think that'll be very easy for you to follow, but this doesn't show it because I don't know how to make the graphics work. But one thing you should do before you talk about this conclusion slide is talk about the color coordination beforehand. It really just started popping up, and then once it got, I think, to the third row, that's when it was high and the background was green for the ventilation effectiveness. And I'm like, oh, what? But then you mentioned it there. But just make sure you do that at the beginning to avoid any of that confusion. Um, and the last note that I took, which I think is probably going to be your most effective strategy for having a really good presentation, is go back and listen to this. Go back and listen to yourself talk. Pretend you're a non-specialist reader or listener, and make changes from there. Use what me and the other peer reviewers say, and use that as you go back and rewatch this, and just listen to what your listener had to say. His Q&A section, his recommendations are really good. So supplement all of that together, and I think you'll do pretty well on the final presentation.